All right, guys, do a little orchestrating with the audio and video here. We're talking about the political leadership of Islam here. And in Islam, the caliph is not only the religious leader, he will be the political leader as well. And this is what will lead to the Islamic schism or breakup. And that is the idea of leadership. The religion is practiced the same way. The difference is over who is going to be the political leader. And a group known as the Shiite Muslims, or Shia Muslims, will believe that the caliph, the leader, must be a direct descendant of Muhammad. About 15 to 16% of the Muslims in the world today are Shia or Shiite Muslims. The predominant Muslim group in the world today is a Sunni Muslim. To be a Sunni Muslim, you are elected. You are selected from the individual who is the best Muslim possible. Third period, make sure you ask me about this tomorrow. I need to rewind this a little bit with you guys. And so, when the caliph, whether you're living in a Shia-controlled area or a Shiite-controlled area, the caliph ruled a kingdom under divine authority. And so if the caliph has a problem or a question, he has a couple sources of guidance to help him. Number one is the Quran. And what does the Quran say? Second to that are the precedents of Muhammad. What exactly did Muhammad do and say? Two examples I use: when he comes back to Mecca, the people who tried to assassinate him, the people who ran him out, he forgave them. Forgiveness is a large part of the religion. And since Muhammad studied with Jewish rabbi and Christian bishops and priests, tolerance and acceptance. So we need to look at what Muhammad did and try and do the exact same thing. If you couldn't get the answer there, there is the ruling of the ulama. The ulama and the Sharia, the Islamic law that governs all aspects of Muslim life. And so Muslims believe that while the caliph had great authority, he is also only a temporal ruler, meaning he is temporary on earth. The caliph's job is to defend Islam, administer its laws and government, to make sure the religion was being adhered to, but he has no greater authority than any other human being in the eyes of Allah. To Allah, all Muslims are equal. And there is one third sect of Islam known as Sufis, a small minority. And the Sufi Muslims are what I call like missionary Muslims. They were a little bit more flexible, less rigid than Shias or Sunnis, and they sought communion and a relationship with Allah through meditation, fasting, and prayer. And they lived a life of hardship, intentional hardship. And so the people respected them for their piety and through some of the miracles they performed, much like Christian monks and nuns in the European medieval world. They did, the Sufis did a lot of the dirty work that nobody else wanted to. They kind of looked after the poor and the infirm, and they went out amongst the people to spread the religion. They carried the faith to remote areas, and they were flexible. Oh, okay, you've got a shrine to St. Paul. That's okay, man. We like Paul too. But in Islam, we kind of do it this way. So they're able to morph and wrap Islam around your local religion to make you more accepted. And so during this time of the original expansion, the Muslims make great achievements, cultural achievements, from everything to art and science and manufacturing. Muslim artisans were excellent at producing fine, what's called Damascus steel, a very strong type of steel for making weapons or even farm implements. And they used this acid etching. They put a little bit of acid in the metal and let it form these elaborate geometric designs. I'll show you a picture in a second, to blacken and make these designs in metalwork, signifying the Damascus steel. Over in Cordova, Spain, in the Caliphate over there in Cordova, Muslims taught Europeans about advanced leatherwork techniques, how to drain, and maximize, arid land for irrigation. Cotton was exported from Egypt along with other fabrics, giving Spain a nice textile industry. When it came to farming and agriculture, Islamic farmers cultivated everything from cotton in Egypt to medicinal herbs and fruits and vegetables. Things that kind of expanded the diet, made it more balanced. And these goods were distributed throughout the Islamic Empire on these trade routes. Different foods were taken to distant lands as a result of the Silk Road. When it comes to art and architecture, Muslims did not believe in idol worship. So making a statue or a painting to a human being is strictly forbidden. So the art form that Muslims practiced was mosaics, getting colored tile in different triangles and geometric shapes and making them into a picture of a flower or, the sky or this elaborate design. They decorated their government and religious buildings with them, and this geometric art was able to form a beautiful pattern that's captivating to the eye. Along with mosaic art, Arabic writing, the flowing Arabic script was turned into an art form, like Chinese calligraphy. The beautiful flowing Arabic writing became a work of art in and of itself. And when it came to architecture, Islamic architects looked at the domes and the arches made by the Roman and Byzantine empires. And they modified the domes, making them a little bit flatter but rounder at the edge. So instead of the Capitol building dome, you have like the New Orleans Superdome. It's bigger but a little bit flatter. It's not as sharply rounded as a dome in Washington, D.C. So they could cover larger buildings and expanses with them. Along with building these domes on mosques and other governmental and religious buildings, the Muslims built very tall, thin towers called a minaret. And the minarets had beautiful stone carving and even mosaic work. And a minaret was used when the muezzin, the person who calls Muslims to prayer, he would climb to the top of the tower and a beautiful singing voice would yell out the call to prayer. And so the more wealthy, the more vibrant your district, the more sophisticated and ornate and decorative become your minarets. Literature and poetry is fantastic. Long before Muhammad was alive, the Arabic Bedouins were, since they were nomads, were an oral people. They loved to tell these rich stories. And these stories combined and connected many of the Arabic tribes together. So coming out of this rich oral history were the great books written down by the Islamic scholars. Some are famous today. There's the stories of 1001 Arabian Nights. Aladdin and the Magic Lamp, like Aladdin and Jasmine, I will show you the world. Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves and Open Sesame. Remind me to tell you a cute little story about that tomorrow while I'm self-promoting. And then there are my favorites. I love the books in the old, claymation, animation movies of Sinbad, the 7 Voyages of Sinbad the Sailor. All of these stories come out of the expanse and growth of Islam going worldwide at this time. And when it came to education, the Muslims will be as sophisticated as the Chinese dynasties, the Han and the Tang and the Song. Muslim scholars were able to travel everywhere they could. And their goal was to learn about everything as possible, from Europe all the way over to China. And this set the tone for the Islamic empire. And the city of Baghdad will, it's destroyed now, it's terrible, most of it is, be home to a big library like the one Alexander had in Alexandria, or even Assurbanipal had in Nineveh. It's where a lot of scholars studied. In this library, and the house of learning was spread to all parts of the Islamic empire, from West Africa clear over to India. And in West Africa, they will try and duplicate it in the great West African capital of Timbuktu. So we have a school of learning in Africa, and up in Cordova, we will have a grandfather and a grandson, Abd al-Rahman I and III, will build a giant school or university in Cordova, Spain, known as a madrasa, M-A-D-R-A-S-A, or a house of higher learning, a school of higher learning that will grow around the world. We'll talk more about those in a later unit. And so at these places, very similar to Alexander's university, Muslim scholars translated and copied the works of the Greek scientists like Socrates and Plato. They added on to the medical knowledge that Hippocrates started. They written down and they preserved Roman learning and law when most people in Western Europe were illiterate. The Islamic scholars and the Jewish scholars preserved this Greco-Roman learning. Muslim scholars also looked at different Hindu and Buddhist texts, and they translated early Christian writings, things that were maintained and they were helped to stay safe before they were destroyed or they re-emerged centuries later. And they translated Aristotle's writing from Latin into Arabic so they could show his ideas. And eventually all this stuff, which went from Europe to the Middle East, will go back to Europe after the Crusades. When it comes to mathematics, Muslim scholars studied math from India, from Greece, from Egypt, and a Muslim scholar will pioneer the study of algebra. Not a big fan of this guy. Why did you make it a letter if you wanted it to be a number? I still don't know. And he became the standard. He wrote the mathematical textbook for Europe after the Crusades. In using his knowledge, other Muslim scholars developed astronomical tables. And they built observatories from the Mediterranean Sea into Central Asia, studying eclipses like the one we had this summer. They measured the speed of the Earth's rotation. They did all of this, calculations, and they were within a few thousand feet of being totally accurate of the distance of the Earth around the equator. And they were doing this when many people in the European world, their contemporaries, thought the world was flat. And the science and math that the Islamic scholars did will greater add in navigation, sailing the Indian, the Atlantic, and even the Pacific Ocean. And when it comes to medical advances, as early as the year 900, when Europeans were drilling holes in each other's head and they had headaches to let out the evil spirits and were using leeches and bleeding as medical techniques, an Islamic scholar named Muhammad al-Razi lived in the city of Baghdad. And he wanted to conduct research on where was the best place to build the hospital. So he moved around the city and he hung strips of meat. And he checked them every day to see which ones rotted the first. And he saw that garbage decomposed the most slowly in the cleaner parts of the city, where there was less bacteria and less rodents and flies. And so Muhammad al-Razi began to study the effects of bacteria. And so that's where he built his hospital, and he based it on cleanliness. Now, a week ago, I gave my Civil War amputation lesson that some of you heard about or saw. And 150 years ago, we were, not as sophisticated as al-Razi was in the year 900. And other Islamic scholars will make remarkable advances in medicine. Special rooms were set up to triage seriously ill people, like a modern-day emergency room. Patients were put in their own solitary room to reduce cross-infection. Something modern-day hospitals are like, yeah, we'll just slam you in there, all right? And physicians were like traveling old-world doctors. They went to rural areas to give medical treatment to those who didn't live by the cities. And many medical books came out at this time as physicians studied and wrote about the effects of diseases like the smallpox and the measles. And one thing comes up is the idea of a positive bedside manner, a friendly smile, a positive, upbeat doctor and nurse. They found out that people recovered better if they had a happy, positive doctor or nurse rather than a Debbie Downer, a sad, grumpy person. Muslim doctors charted over several thousand prescriptions for different medications and how to treat specific illnesses. They stressed cleanliness, especially in wound care, where they cleaned the wound, and they came up with the idea of stitching, which helped heal the wound quicker and permanently. All of these achievements, from manufacturing to science to art, were light years ahead of what was going on in Europe at the same time. Only during the Crusades, 100 years later, did many Europeans find out that what they were doing was completely opposite and wrong compared to the Islamic Empire, the Dar al-Islam. While Europe was in what we call the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, the Islamic world was expanding and growing, coming up with a new culture, a religious and a political system that made great advancements not only in religion but art, science, and medicine, preserved it, reintroduced it, and re-educated Europe. One of the few positive effects of the Crusades for the Europeans was a renewed access to Greco-Roman learning that was preserved by the Muslims at this time. So over here, you have that Damascus steel, the shiny steel that has this elaborate pattern cut in it. Here we have a beautiful tower domed minaret where the muezzin would go. My man, the 7 Voyages of Sinbad the Sailor. This is the Hagia Sophia. It was a Christian church turned into an Islamic mosque in 1453. Here are the 4 big minarets, and here's the more flat, rounded dome. And then over here is mosaic architecture. So a great, vibrant time and culture. And ladies and gentlemen, that is it for Islam. Please watch this, and we'll do some Byzantine civilization tomorrow.